Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week of the Channel Box. Today we have the one and only Shawn Lee with us, and we're gonna ask him some questions about starting school, going to Disney, and now moving over to Pixar. So, without further ado, if Shawn, you wanna talk a little bit about how you got into animation?
Sure. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Um, to all who's live here and to all who's going to watch at some point, whatever that might be. My name is Sean. I got into animation maybe and I'm sure you guys kind of know people who've known me. I've shared my story before, but I've been in the industry maybe like closer to 6 years now, and it feels a lot longer for whatever reason. I So when I first started, I didn't know anything about animation. Like, sorry, my my dog. And yeah, so I didn't know anything about animation, or there was a job out there about for animation, right? 6 years ago. And I was studying to be either a dentist or a doctor, anything medical field, just because that's defined as like the stability and glory for uh minority families. That's like your like direction that you have to take, right? So that's what I tried. But thing is, I'm not very smart. No matter how much I read or try to read or fake read, I just don't understand it. Um, so I wanted to do something that I felt like I could get better at if I just practice hard enough, right? Because science and stuff, it's about for me at that time, no matter how much I memorize it, I don't understand it, right? I'm just hoping that I see a question that answers what I've read in the book or memorized it. So I went into I was doing illustration major, still pre-dent, right? Still trying to go into dentistry, but also like dipping my toe into the art world. I don't know what was going to come out of that. Um, and then someone told me about this animation program at like another university. And I'm like, what's animation? Right. And then at that time, I was told like you could do animator things and pay wise might be like not that great, but you can make a living. So at the time I was like, all right, I called my mom and I was like, I think I'm going to do this animation thing. I don't think I'll make that much money or anything like a doctor would, but I want to try it, And then obviously she yelled at me because it was like so crazy. I was like moving back and forth from different college. But yeah, so I got into that, went to animation, like a brick and mortar college, right, where they teach kind of to be a little bit more of a generalist, right? Do short films on your own, rig your characters and whatnot. I was terrible at it. And there was a moment where I was did this animation thing like in the beginning. And then I remember my professor told me that I had to like really step up because it's not looking good. Right. And at that time I was freaking out because I switched from like a complete extreme. And then now I'm getting told I'm not good at this other extreme that I thought I was going to be better at. So I'm like, oh man, I, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I just stuck through it, and I just kept going with it. Um, and yeah. And then from there, I graduated. I thought my reel looked great because at least compared to my like class in my mind, my naive young mind, I was like, you know what, I feel pretty good. I feel like pretty decent animator. And then we've had like guest speakers come in too, and they're from the industry, so they're like, oh yeah, your work is looking pretty good. And in my mind, I'm like, there you go. I'm just gonna get into industry. And little did I know, I got so many rejections right afterwards from you can name any studio you probably have in mind of Pixar, Disney, DreamWorks, probably Sony. You can name all of it, and I probably got rejected numerous times. So I was living at home in Chicago for a bit with my family, trying to live this dream as an animator, making like literally like 10 different reels, throwing them away, starting over. Yeah, so I lived that typical life of like that starving artist, right? Living with their parents, trying to like make it in the world. Um, and then in my mind, I was like, maybe I need to move to California to become an animator because there might be more opportunities. So I moved, and I only had like maybe 2 months of rent saved up, and I had no jobs lined up, right? So I was still doing animation, but I had no job. So I had to pick up like a random job at a law firm as like an assistant or something. So I was actually dealing with they specialized in like immigration. And thing was like I like kind of lied about my resume where you kind of had to know Korean. And I like know like some Korean, but not like hardcore Korean of like legal terms and stuff. So I was kind of like lied my way in there. So all the phone calls were awkward. I'll get the names wrong. So I was doing terrible at my job. And and I remember I was feeling so down because I was like, I wanted to be an animator. And what am I doing here of like working 9 to 5, like in a job that I hate just to make money to live in California while I'm trying to become an animator. So I had this thought of like moving back home to my family because I'm like, maybe this wasn't the right idea. And my older brother convinced me, it's like, you took all that risk and then, why are you trying to come back home? Because there's absolutely no opportunities here anyways. So he convinced me to stay, and I decided to quit the law firm job without anything lined up again. Again, for anyone who listens, um, don't take, don't do what I did because I was very careless about, like, I took so much risk without anything lined up. Um, so while I was trying to find gigs, I did graphic design on the side while I was still trying to animate. Um, and it got to a point where I was really struggling with money, right? Because again, California is expensive, right? But I was really struggling. So I was like, I need to make money for rent. I even I went in, like I went to Craigslist, and again, don't do what I did. There are these lab experiments, and you get paid for like these like drug testings, right? Because they give you like, oh, this drug's supposed to cure this and that, and then you might be in the placebo group or you might be in the specific test group.
Shawn, are you okay?
Probably not. It probably had like a long-term effect somewhere, um and I just don't know it. Probably growing like this tiny little baby arm in my back somewhere, and I just don't know. But yeah, so I did that to like just to get by. um
How
and
many of
then
those did you do?
I think I did well. So how that works, again, don't look into this if you're struggling with money. um Depending on how invasive the drug is, more money you get paid.
Yep.
Right? Kind of makes sense. And there's a group there. There's a community there where people have been like, just this is like their full-time job kind of thing.
Yep.
Like they're like, hey, they recognize each other. It's like, hey, like, how have you been? And I'm like, man, this is like an actual job, huh? So like, uh, some people stay like for a week in the hospital, and then they monitor you basically, and they provide the food and whatnot, and then you just kind of have to go through the whole testing. But for me, it was only like 2-day thing, and it was like, I forgot which disease it was supposed to help with, but they like even dilated my eyes and everything. They had to test that, like, to see if it would have any effect on the eyes. So that kind of sucks because we're in the animation industry and you need your eyes for like everything. So I'm really hoping there's no long-term effect. But yeah, and
Did
then
your parents know?
I don't know. I don't think I've ever told them. I should tell them. um, but yeah, so like I was doing that, and then I think I took anim school, maybe like 2 courses, right, with Gary Shikuma and Jeremy Lazar. I think I took, a course from Garrett and a course from Jeremy. And then with that, I got into the third floor, right? Third floor studio. They are specialized in previs. But at that time, they wanted to do something ambitious with VR. Like that was like their first project in VR. They wanted to do like a full feature project. Well, not feature, like feature short project all in VR. And this was my very first gig. And then as I'm thankful as I like with for the opportunity, it was like such a big responsibility for me because like how we know walk cycles, but we don't really do walk cycles like all day, every day kind of thing. Like as soon as we just tackle one walk cycle, we're just straight into body mechanics or acting shots, right? So as a junior animator, you get asked to usually do cycles, right? And I'm like, now I'm like thinking of like, like just the whole foundation of contact down, passing up kind of thing, like how to animate, right? And I remember I was panicking a lot because I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm sure you guys know Steve Cunningham.
Yep.
I actually met Steve Cunningham through that. And he actually helped me to like, relax, to take your time. And he kind of helped me to like walk through it, no pun intended. Um, but yeah, so that project lasted about 3 months, and it was like one of the most challenging projects because you had a short time frame, but you have literally 1,000 frames of shot where it's like 60 FPS, right? And the cameras everywhere, so you can't cheat anything. So I had to deal with like two biped characters and a dog, quadruped character, and I've never animated in that such scale before. And then thankfully they gave me so many opportunities of like acting shots and like very mechanical shots. So yeah, like I feel like that opportunity like really like kind of pushed me into the deep end, and I had to like kind of figure out how to not drown while I was basically swallowing all that water, right? So from that experience, like it kind of helped me to like not be as afraid of other opportunities. I've already gotten dealt with these like big like challenges already, so it didn't feel as intimidating to go into other gigs. So after that wrapped, I went into previs because they had a gig for previs for Aquaman. And that, it was like very steady gig. And again, I had no idea what I was doing because I'm like, they're like, you have to animate the camera. I'm like, animate the camera? Like, we're literally told not to touch the camera, you know? So I'm like, I don't know how to touch the camera. So I'm like animating like these like previous characters as if I would animate a real character. And they're like, no, 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 no. Like, keep that rough and then like just animate the character, like the camera and stuff. Um, so that was kind of going, right? And then it was getting to a point where I was like getting intimidated because I don't know what I was doing. Because as a previous artist, you have to know like how to like kind of like use composition of like After Effects and like roughly know how to do effects in Maya as well.
Yep.
So there was this like one underwater scene in Aquaman where the ship is shooting missiles, right? And I'm like, and they wanted me to like show like the water smoke in a way, right, with all the bubbles coming. And I'm like, I did not know how to do that. So again, I was panicking, and at that time, thankfully, Blur kind of came around because I've met Michael Locke, who's an excellent animator, and he also worked at Third Floor with me for that first project. And he had a long history of Blur, so he actually helped me to get in. But again, it was for a 1 month contract. Uh, and it's such a, at that time, especially as a junior artist, and this is something I actually wanted to talk, or just, I feel like a lot of junior artists can relate. When you kind of get into this area of comfort and stability, it's really, really hard to come out of that and to take a risk on top, like from leaving that stability to do something bigger. Even, even if it sounds amazing, like the thought of losing that stability, especially when you work so hard to get into the industry, is so difficult. And my life could have literally changed from that moment if I didn't take the Blur gig, right? I
Yep.
could have literally just stayed at Third Floor, probably even till now. But for whatever reason, as you guys know, of like how much of a risk taker I am and how dangerous I am, I decided to take the 1 month contract, not knowing what's going to happen afterwards. Um, and yeah, and then that 1 month turned into 9 months, and they kept extending me. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe I like Blur. And I came to a point where I felt pretty good in the team. The thing is, the projects were very short. Uh, so there isn't time for polish per se. You kind of have to do everything within like few weeks. So I wasn't really learning too much in the sense of like you just have to execute. There isn't really time for you to grow further. Um, so again, I kind of started feeling like I was like getting close to a plateau because I didn't have enough time to like really grow. And then the Disney trainee program came up, and I wasn't going to apply because I've gotten rejected multiple times before. And I was already feeling comfortable. Again, the topic of being comfortable and being stable. And I'm like, I can be an animator here. Like, I like the people here. And again, that's a very valid, reason for you to stay, right? Doesn't mean you have to like follow like the specific journey, like continue to climb. But yeah, and then my friend's like, did you apply? And I was like, no, I think I'm happy at Blur. I think I'm gonna stay here. And they're like, no, You should just apply. So I did, and thankfully I got in, right? And it's another risk in a way, because I was already working as an animator at Blur, right? And I went into it, I'm getting in as a trainee at Disney, and I'm taking a huge pay cut basically to go from animator all the way to trainee. And it's not a guaranteed if you're gonna stay at Disney either. So again, this whole dilemma of like, do I stay or do I go, right? I like money to keep me alive, but could I take that risk of, the trade is the value of trade is the lessons I will learn and how much growth I will get at Disney from the Disney animators there versus kind of like staying where I'm at here. And so I took that risk and I took that trade, right? I traded money and stability for opportunity to grow. And I think, again, this is an advice to all the students out there or junior artists out there. If you get that kind of opportunity where even if the hint of like, that opportunity is going to help you just exceed even a little bit more, always take that risk. Because I guarantee you will come out of the opportunity even as a better artist that'll make your value go even higher. Because as soon as you start feeling safe and put into this just one like company and you stay there, you usually rarely never get rewarded for loyalty. There's absolutely no gain you're going to get from there, especially if you're feeling like you're hitting this plateau of like you're feeling pretty good and you feel comfortable, you get in the groove of things and you're not necessarily challenged every day. That's when you kind of have to like look at your priorities of like, okay, well, what do I want to become and where do I want to be in like 10 years, 5 years? So from there, got into Disney, started as a trainee. And then I became, I think after Ralph, because I got in for Ralph Breaks the Internet. So I was helping with crowds there. And then I started at Frozen 2 as like an assistant animator, but I really like helped out on, crowds for a little bit, and I actually worked on shots. And then from Frozen 2, I just was a straight up animator, just working on Raya and other Disney Plus projects. And we recently wrapped on Encanto. So yeah, I grew a lot at Disney, but at the same time, like, again, I grew so much at Disney, but at the same time, I came to a point where I felt like I need to grow even further. And again, there's so many great opportunities at Disney, right? But because I think different companies do good at certain things, right? So, because I think if you think of Disney movies, they're good at something that Disney is really good at. And if you look at like Pixar or DreamWorks, they're good at something that other studios maybe not, are not necessarily as strong at. So Pixar, I think, was very interesting to me as an artist because that was like that one studio that I've always wanted to like get into when I was younger. And then as I grew older, the reasons kind of became more clear why. And Pixar, I feel like they're very good at asking the why. And this is something I talk to my students a lot is like, why do you make that choice? Or why is a character going through that moment, right? And I think Pixar is so great at just dissecting their characters of like all the reasonings behind the thought, behind the move, behind the like tiniest little choice. And I wanted to kind of learn more about that. So Pixar came to me like a year ago, basically during the pandemic or like right before the pandemic, and they sent me an offer or two. They sent me the first offer. I couldn't do it. I rejected. Second offer, again, there was a lot going on at the time and I couldn't think of like moving. So I had to reject again. And then when we're thinking about moving to San Francisco for my wife's tattoo shop, timing just worked out perfectly because we were just talking about, I'm like, man, if Pixar reached out again, that would be a crazy sign. Day after, Pixar reached out to me and they're like, I know you rejected our last offer, but we want to give you this other offer as an animator. So I was like, perfect, right? Like everything just like worked out perfectly. So here I am. And I'm sure I went on like a bunch of tangents and hopefully this story was entertaining to some of you, and maybe it helped you like to realize I'm like, man, I don't want to do what Sean's doing and like go to lab experiments and become a mouse rat. But yeah, that's kind of where I am here.
I had a question. Because like I've been talking to Madison a little bit about this, is which studio do you think defined your workflow as an animator the most? Because I feel like it's always the first few studios
Mm-hmm.
that force you to do the most work at a decent quality,
Mm-hmm.
forces you to get 80% really quickly. Then when you
Mm-hmm.
go to the big studios, you're able to focus a lot more on the high polished stuff.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
And so whenever you're
Um,
talking about like the third floor doing like those long shots, I was like, I wonder if like that was like the studio that kind of defined your workflow or
yeah, so when I learned at Anim School for like those two courses, I think that's when I like picked up the workflow of pose to pose, because I think Blue Skies, they're very good at that appeal pose to pose kind of method. And I was kind of like, I learned through that. But thing is, I ran into this issue of feeling too pose to pose where it felt like it's hitting pose, 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 pose. Um, so when I got to third floor, I was struggling a lot because again, for pose to pose workflow, you kind of have this different stages of like blocking, hit spline, panic, and try to clean up. And then now it's like so slow, and you show it to them, like, and you like panic even more, and then you polish after. Um, and then when I got to blur, I think from there, that's when I was kind of like started to get like not to say faster per se, but I think it's because the schedules were shorter and you kind of have to execute on various levels within the short few weeks. I think that's when everything kind of started blending together of like, okay, well, how can I just animate in spline in a way, right? So that's when I kind of started adopting this idea of like, can I do like pose to pose, but also in spline? And then from there, I went to Disney, kind of like, uh, again, with the whole pose in mind. And Disney, again, they're very, very specific on posing, like the tiniest little detail. And I think that's when I kind of learned more about appeal in the posing and also like the timing as well. Um, and then like kind of like just experimenting from there of like from Blur days all the way to Disney. That's kind of when I started kind of like infusing everything I learned into something that I got comfortable with. And that, and again, this is something I've shared with my students before, and to some, I think on Twitch before too. Of like my workflow is very uh, spline heavy in a way because I have the graph editor as like my main. It's like my main editor essentially, but I still keep the idea pose to pose of like as if you're doing block like step blocking, but I just keep it just splined. And if anything, if I'm fighting against time, I would just show the blocking to the directors. But I have the graph editor as like my way to see animation of like how things move, transition from pose A to pose B, and I see that I can visualize that all in the graph editor versus seeing the timeline ticks, right? And I think for me that helped me to like really get more efficient with my workflow because I'm not seeing just artistically of like crafting like these like every little tiny little breakdowns per se, but I'm doing that through the graph editor and seeing the change from the graph editor in the viewport. um, and I think I also took like a master class with McCarowitz like a long time ago, and he's very layer heavy, right? And from there I noticed like how powerful it is if you are more technical in the sense of understanding what's happening under the hood, and it kind of makes you more of an efficient animator. So
yeah.
that's
And I
how.
think important workflow is so important in that, whenever I took your class the first time, long time ago,
Mm-hmm.
I was too scared to implement your workflow because I was like, I have to succeed and I don't want to try something that I haven't done before, and it was scary. But at the same time, I was working at a studio that was like very low quality, a ton of animation, and I didn't really care. And they didn't really care what kind of animation I put out as long as it moved across
Sure.
the screen. And so,
Yeah.
like, if you remember the ninja shot, I was doing that in my old workflow, which was very, very rough. And I look back at that shot and I'm like, man, how much like my workflow's improved. But at work, I was like, okay, I need to learn how to do this method because it's so much cleaner. And a lot of what clicked for me with your workflow is you realize what part of the body you're looking at, and you do
Mhm.
that first, and you make sure that's clean and nice, and then you do the rest of the action, the body, whatever.
Sure.
Because, you know, that's what I fell into with this pose to pose workflow is I'm keying everything. And then I'm
Mhm.
going 3 frames later and I'm keying everything. And some of the motion feels good, but some of the other motion is like super jittery and poppy, and
Mhm.
it's just very inefficient. And I know
Sure.
a lot of people are just scared to try a new workflow because they're like, I have to succeed with this shot. And
Yeah,
that's why
yeah.
it's so important to do like small tests or at work or somewhere else to try out new workflows.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about, I think every studio you go to, you kind of understand that you have to be open-minded with your workflow. Because some animators just work beautifully and very efficiently in their own way, and some other animators do a different way and it's very efficient. But then it's also like adopting new workflow. And it's not necessarily like just completely changing per se, but you're adopting parts and pieces that make sense to you, right? From the other animator's perspective of like, hey, this is what I do to get this, like this X, Y, and Z, right? And you're like, oh, I didn't think of it that way. And then you like experiment with it on your own, and then you end up kind of like making your own version of it. And I think that's a beautiful thing of like not being complacent and again, not falling into this comfort of like, you know, like this no change zone, right? So you're constantly looking for ways to grow. And I think efficiency is a big part of that too.
Mm-hmm.
Because and again, I think like you know, like even little thing as hotkeys or scripts, right? Like, I, I think animators have different perspective on this, but they will say like, oh, make sure you're not relying too much on the tools and stuff. Yes, but also if you know what's going on under the hood, definitely do it because
Yep.
no matter where you go, if as long as the scripts are there and you know how it works, all the repetition, essentially what scripts are doing is all the repetition that you're doing manually, it's just kind of making it, you're just making it do it on their own, right? You're just summarizing it and letting that happen with the press of a button. That's essentially what you need to understand. So that if you just get tied to this button, then I think it definitely cripples you as an animator. But if you know what's going on under the hood, then no matter where you go, you can implement what you're trying to do. And you can also even ask like people from various departments of like, I'm trying to do this. Do you guys have something like that? And most likely the smarter people in that department will probably tell you like, yeah, there we have this, or I can just write you a script real quick.
Yep.
So I think that's like, how to become more efficient in your workflow or like finding ways to like literally cut down those milliseconds of those extra key presses. And again, this is something I've preached a lot in general is like hotkeys and everything, like in efficiency of your keystrokes, I think is so important because it adds up. Like those millisecond adds up to a second, depending on how many key presses you're doing. If you can subtract all of that, find ways to subtract that, you'll find ways of like your workflow is like just make like it just gets faster and faster just because you're just taking those few seconds away from those times you're trying to press something or trying to like, oh, what did I do to pull this down? And you're like looking down at your keyboard of like, oh yeah, it's alt this. So with that said, find ways to put everything within the reach of your little fingers here, right? Try to avoid like you're stretching your fingers like this. Again, it's not, as you get older, it's probably not gonna feel great on your little fingers because we have very, very, uh, I was about to say, what's the word? Very fragile hands as an artist. So find ways to protect that at all costs and continue to work on your efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then another question is, obviously when you're starting out as an animator, your growth is a lot, especially with your eyes of like seeing animation, and you see stuff that looks good 2 years later, you look back and it's like terrible. Do you still feel like your eyes are improving at the same rate or close to the same rate as it was when you first started animation, to where like you see stuff and you're like, oh, this is like, I know what to do here, like this looks great, and then you look back at your old work and you're like, oh, that's terrible. Like, Do you
Mhm.
still see that trajectory of your eyes getting better seeing animation?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that just comes from just experience. It's experience. Like the more you look at work and the more you get called out for those certain issues, that's when you start realizing, oh, like that's an issue. Uh, and I think that's why it's so important that like when you get critiques on your work, and a lot of times depending on the time constraint of like each school or the mentor or the instructor, sometimes they kind of like skip over certain parts because again, they're just trying to help you like finish your shot versus like like pinpointing every little issue. So sometimes like you might not realize you're making those mistakes until like way later. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so if you find ways to get people to like give constructive criticism about your work, even in like tiniest little areas, then you kind of realize like oh, like I've been making that mistake. Like I would have never seen that unless like you told me about that. So I think that's why it's so important to find those people who can give you those kind of constructive criticism to kind of open your eyes a bit. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, our eyes won't like we won't see anything until someone calls out that is an error, you know. Um, so yeah, with that said, like I think for me, it's definitely has helped a lot. Just being surrounded by just just talented artists. Um, and then I think it's also like not just the principles for animation, because I think it's very easy to not easy, but it's it is easier to give notes on the animation principles, but it's harder to give notes on ideas, I think.
Yep.
Because ideas, I think, goes far into asking the artist why a certain thing has happened, and I think for me, I've continued to challenge myself with like why things don't work or like the ideas aren't as strong. I've constantly like find ways of like even like watching shows or watching movies. I try to find those moments of like, man, why did I laugh so hard at that? Or why did I find that so sad? And I kind of try to replay it and I'm like, I ask those questions of why, right? Why did this character express this emotion when the emotion in general is supposed to be sad, but she kind of smiled here, or he smiled here. Like why? Then I'm asking, I dig further of like, of like all those choices, why it was made, and you start digging further into like, like there's like layers of like all these things that you had never noticed. So with that said, like I think it's all about practice, um, and just growing your library of answering all the whys, right? Because I feel like everything ties back into a why. So yeah, I think it's about again not being complacent and just finding ways of asking the whys and in your work and also just in the work that you see from others and from movies and shows and even from real life, right? Because I love seeing things from real life of like just random clips of people just expressing emotions, um, like why that feels so genuine and why does like a certain performance an actor does feel not as genuine, right? So yeah, I think it's constant like research and like collecting that library in your mind of like yeah, like basically try and error of like why things work and why things doesn't. So
Mm-hmm.
if you continue to do that, I think your eyes will definitely develop better because like now I look back at my older work and I'm like like that's so busy or like that's not clear. Like I definitely needed to add more time in there. Like it's. So, anyways, that's essentially, hopefully, the answer to the question.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Cool.
And have there ever been times, especially at work at a studio, where you're asked to do something for no reason because of production, where you're like the director or the story writer, whatever, they're like, "Oh, you should do this," and you're like, "But that makes no sense." And like, how hard is that to like have to? Because like, at least in my experience, I've had to do that, and it's like this doesn't make any sense, and it's hard to get the motivation to do it
Mm-hmm.
because you know it's not great and you know it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, as an animator, I think you'll kind of like run into that all the time of like, you won't necessarily agree with certain choices, especially directors who have a very either strong opinion or who don't know what they want, then you're just kind of like just throwing everything and see what sticks. And then the choice that you thought was going to be the least successful, they end up choosing that. You're like, all right. So for me, I just kind of think of it as like, like this is your story, this is your work, and if I vibe with the story, if I connect with the story, that's great. But a lot of times, certain projects, like we don't necessarily connect with the characters or connect with the story. It's not to say like just because I worked at Disney means I'm like a diehard Disney fan or for every single movie, right? Like sometimes I have trouble connecting with the characters because of either where they came from emotionally, or maybe I'm not just seeing what the directors are seeing. But I think as an animator, it's our job to kind of just execute what they have in mind. And it's a lot better for you to be a collaborator than like trying to go against the grain just because you have this like creative choice in your mind of like that works better. No one likes that. Like it's great that you have a creative input, but at the end of the day, you're an employee working for an employer, and you just kind of do what you're told because they're paying you the money, right? You're not paying them money, right? And I wouldn't pay them money to make my choice. So, I'm gonna make them happy, even if I don't necessarily agree with it. But yeah.
Yeah, especially because sometimes you might not agree with it, but they might have a bigger picture than what it happened to me that sometimes the story wasn't fully developed yet. There were sequences missing. And I thought, oh, that makes no sense. And when I saw the final version, it's like, okay, they already had it in mind. That's why they said it. So maybe it's keeping an open mind because
sure.
they might not have a good reason, but they might.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because sometimes like they don't know how to phrase what they're trying to think of, or like why it works. It's just like kind of like an intuition of like, no, I think this will work better, and you're like, I don't know why, and then you see the final picture and you're like, yeah, that works better. Yeah, so sometimes you like realize that like way later too, of like, I'm not sure why I'm making this choice for you, but I'm gonna trust that it does. And then sometimes you kind of learn from it of like, oh yeah, you're right, it does become better. And I feel like there were in my experience in the industry of like there were definitely moments when there was like very creative uh like clashing that happens between an artist and a lead or a supervisor director, and it's never pretty. But then there are moments when they're just fighting, and then they like actually do what the directors are told, and they see the final product. They're like, oh yeah, you're right, it does work. So it's like, why waste all that energy? Like just be collaborative. I think that's like the biggest thing you can do in the industry, because everyone loves a good collaborative teammate versus someone who's very strong-minded.
Yeah, once you start working in the industry, I feel like you have to give up a little bit of your own artistic license in order, because you're working as a team. And if you want it to be a single person job, do it as a hobby. But once you get in the industry, I see a lot of students say that, like I got into a job and they're having me do things I don't want to do, and I want my own animation, my own choices. But that's something you have to keep in mind, right? When you work in the industry, is you're a team player now. You're not a one-man show.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's definitely something the studio keeps in mind when they're hiring people. Is like, can we see this person as a teammate? Like, are they going to benefit the team overall? Because like if they don't vibe with you for whatever reason, they're there's a high chance of them passing on you just from your personality alone, because it feels like that you're gonna be very like head to head with a lot of folks. So you have to just come in there with a very open mind, just hungry to learn. And especially as a junior artist, like you want to just be a sponge of like just wanting to just learn. You don't want to go in as a junior of like, I have a note, in like Daly's room or something. So definitely go in there hungry and humble. I think it's like a good plan.
Yeah, definitely. But that goes into another question someone asked. Very important question. What was your go-to bagel topping on Bagel Day at Disney?
It's funny because I try to because I've heard that fact of like that bagel is like what consists of like 10 slices of bread, was it? Something like that, in terms of calories or whatever. That's how condensed a bagel is. So because of that, I'm like, man, I should watch what I eat. But when I did have those moments of like trying to eat a bagel, I just went with one half being the veggie cream cheese, because like, you know, for the savory, because I don't like something to taste too cheesy, because I'm not a big like just cheese person. Like I like cheese on things, but not necessarily just cheese as itself. So veggie cream cheese and like strawberry cream cheese. Again, I have like probably taste bud of like a 5-year-old, so that's kind of like was my go-to. Some people probably be like, oh, a lox bagel with like, you know, like capri salad or something. I don't know. For me, I'm just like strawberry jam and and make stars with it. But yeah, that was my go-to. And then like with like a cup of coffee or something. But that was about it.
And then another question is tips on staying motivated and prevent burnout.
Mm, yeah, that's a big topic. Because I think each and one of us, even as a student who is not in this, can all pitch in on this of like, I think we all have our different healthy outputs of like how we at least try to resolve that. Because again, I think a lot of us have felt some sort of burnout even now from the pandemic and being quarantined. Um, yeah, because this isn't normal. The fact that how long we're in front of our computers, especially now it's like work from home situation. So we're literally like the work and home life has kind of merged into one. So our environment's always the same. So I think mentally, I think we're constantly drained by that. So that's like another big topic of like, you know, feeling motivated, because I get that message a lot from students of like, sorry, I couldn't like, you know, put in the work or have sent you anything this week because I just felt so burnt out. And I think it's, especially now, it's feeling more common than before. And I think it's because like what I just said of like everything kind of merging into one. So there's like no time to like mentally reset, you know, unfortunately. So in order to feel motivated for me, and I think motivation is a very, it's not something that you just pick up. Like you just, it's not like a switch or a button that you can just find and you're like, oh, there it is. There's the motivation button. You just click and it just comes in. Um, it's like you have to find ways basically to like, you have to actively find ways to motivate yourself, or in other ways to get yourself in front of your goal, essentially. Like, just imagine you're like, I don't know, you're at it. Let's say there's like this like a race line, right there, right, for I don't know, like a track or a marathon, and you're all the way over here. And let's say this marathon line, the start line, is your motivation. It's about how you can get yourself from all the way here in front of this marathon line, essentially. I think of that as like a motivation of like, you have to find ways to get yourself from here all the way to here. Um, and that is different for every person, I think, of like how we can, you know, get ourselves in front of the start line. So for me, I like to kind of find ways to make things feel real for like, because again, I think motivation is just so hard to come by and it's very short sometimes, like very short lived. So what I do is find ways to get myself in front of, let's say my goal right now is to create a shot. So find ways to get myself in front of the computer. And again, that might be very difficult a lot, especially if you animate all day and then now you have to animate again at the same desk, at the same computer. That's very difficult, I know. So what I like to do is find realistic goals of like, can I do 20 frames this week, right? Can I do 10 frames this week? Which means literally what, 2 frames for 5, like each day? Can you do that? That sounds pretty doable, right? So when you do it that way, it makes it more tangible, that like, it makes you get in front of your desk because you know you can tackle that goal, versus you have this big picture of like what your shot's gonna be and it's like 400 frames long and you're like, I just want to relax. I don't want to think about that. That's such a huge burden. But when you start breaking it down and scheduling it out to like 2 frames, you're like, okay, I can do 2 frames today. And that's why at work it makes sense, because they schedule us for each shot, right? It's like you have to get the shot done in two weeks, and you start scheduling in your mind of like, I need to put this amount of time into blocking for this week, or this amount of time for spline next week, right? You start dividing it up, it makes more sense, and you actually get yourself in front of your computer. And again, we're paid to do that. So for personal work, or do assignments, it's about kind of finding that schedule, making that schedule very realistic to get yourself in front of your computer and to actually do it. And from that moment, for me, I find ways to be motivated through there. Because as long as I'm on the starting line and I start the marathon, no matter how slow I go, I'm going, right? I'm not going backwards, I'm going forward. So that's kind of like where I try to find motivation of like getting yourself started. And then from there, you find motivation, those outlets that you need to kind of get yourself to keep going. Because you might have some pauses here and there, but you're still moving, right? Doesn't matter how slow you're going. So you have to look for ways of like, you know, some people might like to watch like animation clips here, or I don't know, like listen to different talks, or maybe even listen to music. Because like sometimes, as long as you're in the finish line, you're running, walking, jogging, whatever it might be, as soon as you start to get into the groove of things, you'll find yourself like, although you promised yourself you only do 2 frames, most likely you'll find yourself doing 3 frames or 4 frames, and then you kind of do more. You're like, because you're starting to get into the groove of things, you're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. It's like, yeah, I'm going to do that. Like, oh, this is good. And you kind of find yourself motivating yourself because of the results that you're putting into it. So I think that's one of the biggest motivation factors, at least for me as an artist, of like seeing my work come alive. Because again, I can watch all the Marvel movies or animated movies and feel very motivated. But if I'm not at my desk, that motivation is probably going to be gone by the time I like walk to my desk, and I'll be like, probably going to sleep now. Right? So I think it's very important for you to like set your priorities straight and get your goals as realistic as possible. You might have this big, gigantic goal, but try to like see if you can dissect that goal into something smaller for the week, for the day, and then from there you can go from there.
Yeah. And I think an important thing of what you were talking about is making sure your goals are what you actually want to do. Mm-hmm. Because this was changed a lot in your class. For me, was I had this beautiful, I want to get into feature goal, which at the end, my goal is to get into feature because I feel like that's where I'm going to grow the most. But I think a lot of people that I know may not even be cut out to work in animation professionally. It's more of a hobby is what they want to do, but they think they need to get a job. Or they think they need to get into feature. And so like my goal was I need to get into feature because that will make me a good animator. And so my goal was not exactly correct, and so it was killing my motivation. It was killing my, what I needed to do. And then whenever you had that class one time where you were like, if I needed to, I would rather work a part-time job and animate what makes me happy than working at a job that makes me unhappy, working at an animation job where I'm not fulfilled. And it got me thinking, I was like, I need to be animating what makes me creatively fulfilled, what makes me happy. And I want to grow as much as I can as an animator. So that's the goal I go to now, and it makes motivation so much easier because my goal in anything is just to get better. And it's so much easier to go through, get motivation, to sit down at that computer. If you're like, I want to be a better animator. This guy over here is working this much hours. He's doing amazing. I want to do that too. So I'm going to sit down and animate, as opposed to, oh, I got to get this shot out because Disney's looking at me and I need to get this shot out for like, it just changes your perspective a lot, I think.
Sure. Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. And I think as a student, like especially in the beginning, I think we're very starry-eyed by Disney animators and Pixar animators. We want to be just like them when we grow up, And then when you get in there, you're like, oh man, they're just as miserable as I am. Yeah, and when that realization sets in, you're like, oh man, this is just a job, It's not that serious. It's just a job, But it doesn't mean you can like enjoy you can enjoy your job, sure, but like, yeah, it's just like, no matter where you go, you'll find talents. There's a lot of creative people out there. There's a lot of these wonderful artists who might not be at the bigger studios because of their choice, or it's just something they, just never thought about going to like a bigger studio. But like you said, it's a kind of like finding ways to like finding, um, you know, the opportunity to grow no matter which studio you're at. So I think sometimes we, especially when we're as a younger artist, we kind of cripple ourselves when we put our trajectory just to like only the big studios of like DreamWorks, Disney, Pixar, and that's just like my only three paths. When there are like these multiple avenues of like you could have taken that opportunity and have gotten you even closer to the studio of your dreams, right? But I think a lot of times we miss it just because of the fact that I have to get into Disney or I have to work at this studio. And I think, and I'm hoping that it's more true, and I'm hoping that like students are nowadays are seeing more of that. I'm hoping because there's so many opportunities out there coming up, especially like with new studios that's coming up too, and so much content. There's like various projects that you can work on, and I think like there's so many fun projects I want to do that's not from big studios, and I think that's what's exciting. So rather than looking specifically at the studio name, at a brand name, right? Look for those like, look for projects more than the studio. Like see what excites you. It's like, is there a dragon project? Then like, oh dude, I wanna animate some dragons, or like some sort of character that you like really like connect with. Like look for projects like that, because that at the end of the day will fulfill you. Besides the fact of this clout being, I'm a X, Y, and Z animator, because that will never make you happy. And I say that with my like, because again, I went into the same mentality when I was younger. I was like, man, if I'm a Disney animator, if I'm a Pixar animator, I'm gonna be so happy. It's not. It's not. Maybe for a little bit, like artificially in your mind, you might think like, yeah, that makes me happy, but like you'll realize that people don't really care that you're a certain animator. Like maybe in the animation industry, sure, but like when you're outside of that, like your family members, sure, they're happy for you, but they're like, whatever, right? They're like,
They
anyways.
barely understand what animation is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like my mom asked me a few months ago, so what is it that you do? I'm like, Mom, come on.
Yeah.
You saw me work and study, but yeah.
Or some of them think that has to do with drawing.
Oh yeah.
Draw it ends up in the computer.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly what Chad said. So what part did you draw?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Can I get you some box of crayons today? Or
yeah, but I agree with you. I think I have a lot of friends who are just now starting in the industry, and a lot of them are like, no, if I don't get into Disney, then I'm just gonna keep studying forever until I get it. I'm like, look, my first two jobs, like even the one that I'm now, are at small studios. The first one that I had, I learned so much. And now, yes, if Disney wants me, I'll be there, of course. But I'm looking at all the other opportunities. Like, for example, there's Animal Logic in Australia doing incredible things, really high quality, where you would learn a lot, but people don't consider them. So it's like trying to open up your horizons.
Sure. Yeah.
My biggest like growth as an artist, I think, is when I changed my goals from like, I want to work at like feature this big studio, I want to work here, like thinking about the goals in terms of placement and thinking it more now in terms of self-growth as an artist. Like, hey, my next job, I really want to work on my spacing. I have issues with like getting timing right. Or my next job is like, I really like the job I'm working currently is like, I want to get efficient with my workflow. So that's been like my goal in this job. And thinking about that going forward has helped me so much not be complacent or stressed even too as much, because I'm not thinking like, oh, my next shot has to get me to the studio or my next shot has to get me this job, but more of like, what am I learning from this shot has dramatically increased my growth.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's definitely changing your priorities and like really focusing on what matters at the end of the day. Because again, you working at a company doesn't equate to anything, honestly. It's all at the end of the day. Ultimately, you have to do what's best for you and what you think will help you the most. Because again, company name, sure, maybe it'll get you, at somewhere with your resume, but at the end of the day, it's all about what you put into your reel and where your skill set is. and whatever studio that helps you to get into that skill set is like what matters the most.
Yeah.
Wait, but before we continue, I have to open the door in the front door real quick.
Okay.
So
Cool.
continue to talk. Let me be right back.
Yeah, okay.
I love Sean's dog in the background.
It was so
he was
funny.
moving his back leg. He was just like
Not
stretching
just that,
and
like Sean was
sleeping.
talking about burnout and being motivated, and the dog is like,
The dog's
I
like
have
that.
the best life.
Also, thank you, Chad, for the sub with the Prime.
Yes, thank
It
you.
scares me, which I'm kind of dumb because I did it on purpose, but I put the subscriber and follower as Windows error noises, and every time somebody follows or subscribes, I'm like, Maya just crashed, and then I look over and see that it's a sub or a follow. So it's kind of dumb because I did
You
it
like
to
living on
myself.
the edge.
Yeah, I just forget that I did that, and then every time it happens, I'm like, whoa.
Or just a little shot of adrenaline, It's better than caffeine.
Exactly.
Oh.
Would you like to send your crash report to Autodesk?
Oh,
That's
no,
what we need. It
nightmare.
needs to be a little crash report whenever it comes up. You set up the rig.
Nightmares.
It's the best.
But yeah, I think going back to the motivation thing, I think also for me what helped was think about my priorities. Like I was super motivated when I was at AM because my goal was to leave the country. So
Yeah.
my motivation was 300%.
Yep.
And so now I need to find what is that I want, what's my next goal in the industry. And that's why I think personally I'm not that motivated right now because I don't know where I'm going. So I feel like maybe for some people you could figure out where it is that you want to go. And it's not just I want to go to Disney. No, like what, like you're saying, Madison, like, oh, I want to get better at this specific thing, or I want to get my first junior job, or like something more achievable than just a specific studio.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's hard to identify those because there's so much that goes into it of like, this job offers you way more money, but this job gives you better quality project that you're on, and there's so many things you have to juggle.
Yeah.
Of more than
But that's
just
why you need
like,
to figure it
yeah.
out. What do you want? Like for me right now, I care more about learning than the money.
Yep.
So if another job comes in that pays me less, but I'm going to learn a lot, I take it as kind of they're paying me to study.
Yep.
So I'm winning.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Shawn, we were talking about how funny it was that you were talking about all of this like burnout and motivation, and your dog is like,
Yeah, it's working so hard,
Yeah.
It's funny, like every time I go to work, to the office, he always follows, and then he just like literally just sleeps. But it's almost like as if like it's his job to sleep. So I'm
Reporting
so
for duty.
yeah. So every morning I'm like, I make my coffee, and I'm like, all right, you ready, office? And then he'll be like, he's like run straight to the office, get into that couch, and just like sleep all day. I'm like, yeah, that's his
terrible job.
Yeah.
So hard. But that kind of gets me into the another question is, you have so much stuff going on of like, you're working at Pixar, you've got Kielsil, you're making rigs for Kielsil, which is another almost full-time job, from me doing it. I'm realizing how much goes into that. What part of your life gives you the most creative fulfillment between animating personal shots, Kielsil, teaching, making characters, and working at Pixar?
Yeah. It's funny, like when you, when I was at Disney and doing like Encanto, it was a 55-hour week production for like a few months. And when you get to that point, everything like ends up not mattering. Like you're like, it's a cool show for sure. Like, and then when you see the like a big sequence, you're like, oh, that's really cool. But then when you're in it doing the 55, all you're seeing is just like, oh, like I have to finish this shot. So creatively, that's when I was starting to get like really, really dry. But I noticed like, and again, I think every project will be different. So like for Pixar, the project that I'll be on, like they show me the sequence and the trailer they're going to do, and it was super cool, and I got like so excited, and I was like, man, this would be like really cool. But once I get shots, and depending on how the shots go, it might really change like uh my emotion towards it. So in terms of like being creatively fulfilled, I think a lot of it is like, or just fulfilled in general too. For me, I think it's like, I think for me is seeing other students, like especially like through Kyoshi, like when I see other students doing really good work and they really understand the note I'm trying to give them, and they start implementing it, and then they see those moments like a light bulb moment of like, oh, like my workflow was this before, but now like I understand better. And then for me, like that's so fulfilling because again, like as you guys know, like I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and with the whole idea of Kyosho is that we're trying to all learn and grow together. And my my hope and my goal with Kyosho was to like help other artists to realize their potential. And whenever I see those moments, I feel so fulfilled because again, like it it means so much more to them of like that they figure something out that been bothering them for so long. So even if it's like the smallest little thing that that we've worked together, I think those are the moments that like really, I don't know, I find it more exciting nowadays. It's like, especially when we're in the idea phase of like when I start asking the questions of like, well, why is the character doing this way, and why, asking all those whys, and then like we're working together and brainstorming together of like how can we plus the shot, or how can we redirect the shot and really think about the character and really ask the whys, right? And when I see the shot go from that beginning phase all the way to the final phase of like what it looked like then and to now, and how much it has improved and how much they improved as an artist, I think for me that's the most fulfilling, especially in the past like year or so, more than like my job. Because again, full-time job, it's like it's fun. Um, there are moments when it's creatively fulfilling, but then a lot of times at a certain point, it's just all about execution. You just have to finish the shot, right? So there are those like bursts of moments where like you get to like really think about the characters and stuff, and you get this performance bit. They like it, and then now it's all about execution. That's when my creative juice kind of just like turns off, because now it's just about just making it work. Um, so yeah, I feel like for like as an animator, we have those like short bursts of like really like this like big creative moments of like, oh, I get to do this with a character, and then as soon as you start getting into polish, you're like, okay, gonna listen to some music and just execute. But
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think, considering you seem to really love all of that creative, like creating the character and ideas, that you would want to move into a director position at some point, or you're not thinking about that right now?
Yeah, I don't. That's the thing. I don't know. There's something. It's funny. That's like my dad always like tells me is like, because again, he's a very traditional, you know, Asian dad of like, you have to keep moving up in the corporate ladder, and then he thinks like being a director is the next step. But for me, like, I'm like, I wish I had a great story to tell, but at the moment, like, I don't know. It's hard to think of like this like big story like a director would, and for me, I find like really like big enjoyment out of performance of a character. Um, and it's actually something like I thought about more lately too, of like how much I enjoy that process of like really thinking about the character. And it's great, especially when students come with their ideas of like who their character is, and we like dig further into like who the character would be, and really trying to dive into the performance aspect of it and really get into the acting aspect of it. So I really enjoyed that as essence of it, of like building characters. But in terms of like the big story, I think I'm like not smart enough to think like to think to see it that big, right? So maybe one day, but I don't know. I wish if I have, I think as I get older and I have like more stories to tell, I'm sure it'll come a point where I want to. But yeah, at the moment, I don't know. I just love character performance. I love studying just performance and why like some acting is good, some acting is bad, etc., etc. Yeah.
And that almost segues perfectly of what you were talking about with Kyoso to the next question, which is, with so many online anim schools out there, what makes Kyoso unique and stand apart from the others? Which, as a student, I can answer a little bit. Is like, I've been to a lot of different animation schools, and Kyoso's my favorite because it's not a business, right? It is a business, but it's not run like a business.
Mhm.
It's just like you said, everybody learning together, and there's not this gap of mentor and students, and you don't talk to the mentor except for in class times, and you only ask him these questions, and the mentor's very professional, and like there's not that gap there where you feel like you can't come to the mentor with anything and talk about your shot and brainstorm together and feedback and ideas and all that. Like, it just brings it all together, and it makes it so much more conducive to become a better artist.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, like you mentioned, like it's definitely not a business per se, because like like in terms of like how much money like we make per se, it's definitely like it's not built as a way to like grow. It's just like literally it just exists as it exists.
Yep.
There's no potential to grow because again, even with other mentors, like they basically get like the entire cut almost. So it's like a very small percentage and stuff compared to other schools. So it's just like to kind of pay them for their time of like how much effort they put into the school and stuff. But yeah, in terms of like you said, like how it stands out from other schools, it's like the whole idea when we made Kyosho, and you know, Daniel, you were there too when it was like the beginning phase of like I said, I was very like annoyed by the fact of like how much like how it felt like online education was like in this like little like I don't know, this like curriculum kind of thing of like this is what online school has to be. You have to go through this to get a shot done and stuff. And I think there is some truth and merit and goodness out of like online schools. And I'm definitely not saying like online schools are terrible or anything. And I think a lot of students come out from online schools like as a great animator. But I think there is definitely, like you said, like a disconnect sometimes between an instructor and a student. And it's again, it's different for every instructor, I'm sure. But yeah, I wanted to find ways to connect those, like you said, that bridge together, because like there are very passionate like professionals out there who are also passionate about wanting to give knowledge, right? Because again, not every professional is a great teacher. They might have notes and stuff, but they might not able to get you to understand why they give you those notes. And I think, and this is something that frustrates me too, is that sometimes I think like sometimes like these online schools, like the professionals that behind it sometimes like don't necessarily see it as like how much responsibility it is to be a mentor or an instructor to students. And they just kind of see it as like a side little gig of like,
Yep.
let me give you like this like quick note and stuff. But these students like literally paid so much money just to come to the school, and like you're only giving them 10 minutes of notes. Like what kind of BS is that, right? And the reason why I feel so passionate about it is because when I was a student and I wanted to attend these schools, but it was expensive, right? And then there was like, I remember like, I found these like different websites of like, oh, pay X amount of money to get your reel reviewed by a professional, right? And again, I wasn't working as an animator, right? This was when I was living at home after I graduated. And this was a time when I was asking my parents to pay for a rig and stuff, right? And my mom's already, again, like she was already struggling as is financially. So for me to ask her like, oh, can you help me pay like $50 for a rig or something, right? Like even that alone is a big ask for me to do that. So when I see this thing of like, oh, just for you to connect with a professional, pay this amount of money, like that frustrated me so much as an artist, because I'm like, can I ask my parents who's like struggling financially for that amount to, you know, to just to talk to a professional, right? And even when I talk to professionals via email, like, professionals are busy usually. And then it's always like that awkward phase of when you contact professionals you don't know through an email. It's always like that weird, like, it, it's a weird connection kind of sometimes, because like email kind of can sound like a little creepy sometimes, of like, oh, I was just lurking and I found your work. Can you talk to me a bit? You know? So it's hard, right? Because you might be coming from a really genuine place, but then that email kind of like sets you in like this creepy place of like, you know, like looking in the shadows of like, can you talk to me? So I definitely understand that, and I've done the same too, you know. And so I definitely don't blame any professionals who've ignored me in the past. Um, so yeah, and like I said, going back to the point of like how much it is to pay for these schools, although they follow a curriculum and stuff, there's not enough time a lot of times because of like what they're trying to accomplish in a short term. And again, I think it works for some people who are just faster or just at a better trajectory compared to other students, but then there's some students who just need a little bit more time to understand. So I think that's why I wanted this idea of like, why can't we make a place where it feels more genuine between the connection between a mentor and a mentee, right? So that's kind of like the whole idea of Kyosho, of like how that became what it became, of like, instead of rushing through every process, let's take time with it. Let's not have the output as our main goal. Because again, online school business is like, the whole idea is like, after our school, you'll get into feature places, you know, like look at all these like success stories. I don't want that. I hate that. I hate selling this idea of like this dreams that doesn't really equate to every person, right? And I don't want that to be the dream either. Like I want every artist to kind of find their value and find their voice through you know, through their work, and find enjoyment out of learning, versus like this creating this artificial goal of like, I'm attending the school so I can get this output of getting into studios. And I feel like that mentality is so disheartening, because imagine if you spend however much money for the entire program and you come out of it and your work is not that great for you to get noticed by studios, but you spent all that money and then you graduated and you're like, I don't understand why, because I've done exactly what you guys told me. So that's when the issue comes in, is because, again, the goal for a lot of like online schools or the schools in general is like to get you to produce something for you to kind of get in front of, for you to even just send something. And again, it works for some people, but it doesn't work for everyone. Yeah. So I wanted to create this space of like, I want to focus more on the person as an artist, of like just learning, just finding ways to grow as an artist. And it is something that we talked about all together, of like finding growth in every artist. And yeah, and then finding enjoyment out of it. Because I don't think education has to be just like this one, you know, one single container. And I think it can be molded into this like beautiful thing with per student. Because if a student is understanding a certain concept, and if I just go into the next week of like, sorry, it's too late, now we're going into lip sync, then that student's always going to forever struggle with that phase. Yep. And they're always going to feel behind. So I don't want that. So that's why the whole Kyosho was created, so is that we take time with every person for every stage. If we have to spend literally 4 weeks just on story, let's do it. If we spend 8 weeks on story, let's do it. I'd rather have you understand something and get something out of the term, versus you accomplish a shot that might be just really well-polished poop, you know? Like, I don't want that, again, because like we can teach fundamentals and stuff, but we can't, the whole foundation is what's so important, right? So that's kind of like what I want to like make sure every student comes out of Kyosho. But yeah, again, I think every school has their own pros and cons. I'm sure we have our own pros and cons too. But again, I think for us, it's about finding flexibility so that we can continue to grow and really prioritize the students, and not like prioritize our business of like, how can we become bigger? And my job for other mentors to help other students to see these great mentors of like, they're very passionate in their craft and they're very great as mentors. Because like, again, I'm not like seeking out just professionals, right? Because like I said, not every professional can teach. So I'm looking for ways to like, I'm looking for those people who want to be a positive influence in these students. So
And I 100% agree with what you're talking about of like, paying all this money for a 10-minute critique. But I would say, personally, a 10-minute critique would be long for most schools. In that, like, my biggest critique of AM, which I went to and graduated from, is that officially you're capped at 5 minutes. You should not give a critique longer than 5 minutes, and that is not enough, especially for students who are paying a lot of money. And I've seen critiques as low as 2 minutes, 1 minute, where the student is really needing help. Like, even I can see it, and I would not say I'm a mentor at all. And I'm seeing a 2-minute critique, a 1-minute critique, and there's all these issues that are left out. I'm like, that is really not fair to that student, because they're trusting this mentor. There's this trust there that you're going to tell me if I have issues, and you're going to help me grow as an artist. And whenever schools or businesses, whatever, cap that down to where they're skipping over issues because they don't have enough time, then that artist goes out thinking they have a false sense of security of like, this mentor said this shot was good, and then they can't get a job and another job and another job. And then they go to someone that actually gives them this feedback, and they get honest feedback, and it's like crushing, because they had this false sense of like, oh, I'm a good artist, I got this great shot, and then it's like, no, this isn't that great. And then they're like, oh, that's 12 weeks of waste. And that kind of happened to me, actually, of like, I was in a class and I was doing a shot, and I actually got a feedback from you on the idea, and you were like, this idea isn't quite working, I'd try doing this, 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 this. And because I was in the class, I was like, okay, I like these ideas, but I don't have time because I have to submit tomorrow, and I didn't have time to change anything. And then I went through the entire class, I finished it, and I learned a lot, to be fair, because I had to block it, spine, all that. But that shot will never be on my reel because the idea just didn't work, right? And it kind of deflated me, because the one person was like, oh, this idea works. But then I went to you, and you were like, it doesn't. And I agreed with all the points that you gave. And I was like, this makes a lot of sense. And so, like, it's very hard, I think, of a balance between, you have to set rules when you're a big school, because you have a ton of different mentors, a ton of different students. I understand that, which is why I think you guys stand out, because you're not big and you are small, and you don't have to make all these massive big rules to make everyone fit inside a box, because it's just 4 mentors. And that's the invaluable part, I think, of it to me.
Yeah, right. And I think what's great is that what you guys started too is like, you guys are providing just free feedback whenever, and you guys have created this community where anyone could join. And I would have killed for this kind of like thing when I was a student, because like again, like I told you guys, when I was a student, I was struggling to find resources online to connect with professionals. And then the fact that you guys are putting yourselves out there, like especially like the talent that you guys have, and that you guys are providing it, just doing these streams, I think students just need to realize how valuable that is. So again, I think that's, for me, it would have been so beneficial. But yeah, so congrats to you guys.
Yeah, I think just honestly for us, it was just giving back to what we had been given, because like, I think every successful artist has 20, 30, 40 people that gave time to them. Even Cynthia gave tons of time to me, because she was way ahead of me whenever I started AM, and she was giving me feedback on my bouncing ball and walk cycle. And like, unless you're just a super self-absorbed person, it's hard to get through your artistic journey in school and not be just overwhelmingly thankful to everyone who gave time to you. And if you have that, you're like, I want to do that for someone else, because all these people sacrifice time to help me. I can't just keep that to myself. I have to give it out to all these other people now, because you got to keep it going.
It's true.
Yeah. The same thing happened to me, kind of, Shawn. Where the first time that I did AM, because my journey is kind of weird, I joined in class 2, and people already knew each other, so it was really hard to make friends, and so I was very alone. I was like, this is horrible. I went to class 3. I had anxiety attacks because there was nobody to go and be like, hey, can you help me? So when I restarted AM, I was like, I'm going to create the community. I'm going to force people to become my friends, and we're going to give feedback to each other. We're going to do this. And I think what you're saying about this thing of community and being able to help each other, for me, it's super important. And like you say, I get so much fulfillment from people coming back to me and saying, you know, that thing you said really helped me, or that demo you did, man, things make sense now. It's like, thank you.
Right,
I'm so
right.
glad something helped.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Those moments are so good.
Yeah.
Love it.
And it's kind of like, to a small extent, the community at Kyosil, at least of the students, was kind of a small nucleus of like kind of the community that Sin started, because she pulled me into that. And then whenever, you know, you and I were talking on Twitch and you were like, hey, let's start a like small class. If you can get 8 or 10 students together, like the first Kyoso class, they were all people that Sin had pulled together, and we were all on a Slack group. And then from there, it kind of just like spread out of like, I was like, guys, you got to come to this school. Like, you got to, this is great. And, you know, like Kenny, I pulled Kenny, like I forced Kenny to get into Kyoso. Madison, I forced in.
Yeah.
Chad, like there were so many people from like Sin's group that I was like, guys, get over here. There's some good critiques going on. Like you're getting 20-minute crits, 30-minute crits, and they're live. You can ask questions, and like I was just like plugging it so hard. And so I was like, a lot of the like helpful like student stuff I think came over to Kyoso, at least a little bit, which I think is super super nice, because it's like we all kind of knew each other and we were all friends to start out with, so that the new people that came into Kyoso, we just like ushered them in a little bit. So.
Yeah, yeah. No, yeah, that's why, yeah, you guys are almost like the founders in a way.
The oldies.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's great. Like I said, Kyosho it's a special place. Like you said, you know, we're not run like a business, and there are times when I'm like, you know, maybe this won't last for another year, kind of thing, you know, like maybe I want to take a break, or and then the only reason that makes me come back to it again, it's not like a place where I get it's making me rich, you know. It's definitely not that.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work that gets put into the behind the scenes, and you know, just making sure everything is running. Because like you said, like that, when I do feedback, I don't put a timer or anything, and we just sometimes like one critique could go for like 40 minutes, right? Because the reason I try to spend a lot of time on each feedback is like I'm not just giving this like black or white answer. I'm trying to understand why the student made the specific choice, and I'm trying to like word my notes in a way where they can question themselves as an artist of like why they made that choice, and I want to make sure that note makes sense to them and how they understand it. So while I give notes, is like I try to find like little moments of like lecture per se of like, this is how you do this kind of thing to make this kind of feel. And you know, I try to explain the reasons why behind a note, so that if a student doesn't agree with it, fine, right? But they know why I gave that note and why it could enhance that moment. And I think that's kind of what differentiates between a good critique versus like a mediocre critique. Because I think it's very easy to give mediocre critiques of like, you should do this and that's final kind of thing. But if you can explain why, and it's in a very like that makes sense to that each student, I think that's kind of like, for me, is a challenge. It's a good challenge, because like I try to understand every student and where they come from and their background, so that I can kind of like gauge like how they learn as an artist. Because like the feedback that I give is very different for every student, because I kind of gauge like what they get right away, because I don't have to like go as deep for certain like section, because I know how that you will execute it. But if there's a student struggling for like certain parts of the execution, then I kind of like literally draw like, either I draw out the graph editor and like, this is what X is going to be doing, and this is what Y is going to be doing. You can try that and see if that works. And if that doesn't, blah, blah, blah. And if, let's say they're more of a visual learner, then I pull up Maya and I just literally just show the movement, and I'd be like, yeah, I think that could work, right? So we're just like in this collaborative environment of like just continuing to just, you know, and I think that's what's the fun part about giving feedback, is like, can you make the other person understand in their own language, right? In their own mind. versus because it may make sense to you, right? But it may not make sense to others. So that's why I think professionals, especially in the teaching business, right, they should really take that to heart and be serious about teaching rather than being like this part-time gig that they're doing. Because again, I find that such a big responsibility to be a teacher. Because again, if you think of a teacher in a school setting, they go through various educations, not just as like from what they know as like, let's say they're a history teacher. They're not just an expert at history, but they're also like, they also have to take courses in like how to teach or how to run a class. They go through various trainings. And then for an online school like this, for a professional just to get thrown in there and be like, teach, right? Like, it's a big responsibility, and I don't think many realize that, and I don't think they take that seriously. That's why it makes me so angry, because a lot of like professors I've talked to or seen how they see teaching on the side is very very lukewarm, and it's a very like I have to teach tonight kind of thing. You know, rather I want to see professors like excited and, you know, like they want to help the students to learn. And that's why my job, at least at Kyosha, is to find those mentors who are that passionate, and then kind of help them connect with the students.
And just from personal experience, like you talking about the way that you teach, the way you teach is a very 2D heavy approach to it, of like doing very nice very nice drawovers. And I've seen with other mentors that have that same kind of heavy 2D approach, they don't go into as much detail as you do. And so it's very easy for students to fall into just matching the drawings, and they get a really great shot out of that mentor. But then they move on to the next mentor, the next shot without that mentor, and they have a huge fall off. And their shot isn't as good. But the thing that amazes me so much with your students, which I could name off, you know, probably 20 right here that I know you know as well, that they leave your class and they go do personal shots on their own, and their level is way above what it was when it was in your class. And that's what I tell everyone, that I can't say enough good stuff about Kyostill, is that it's not just, oh, get a great shot in this class and then you're going to fall off. It's that you're going to get better and better and better and better. And students that could barely like animate body mechanics are doing these super cool shots. Like somebody just showed me a shot the other day that they were doing on their own, and I was like, wait, this person animated this? Like, this is amazing. Like, and I look, and they were in your class last term. I'm like, oh, makes sense. Like, there's a lot of growth, and the students retain that growth instead of just using your drawings to get a good shot and then falling off.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's the goal. It's like, I want, like, if anything, my ultimate goal for every student is to come out of it just being better, so that in case they go anywhere else, they retain what they've learned through every critique, even if it's not theirs, and if it's someone else's, that they know how to implement it on their own without my help. And I think that's a big thing too, especially like, you don't want to become that person who needs to be handheld in a production, because no one has time for that. And my job is to make sure that you understand every reason why and each note might help, right? And I emphasize the word might help, because again, we all make mistakes, even professionals. Sometimes we give notes of like, I'm not sure if it's going to work, or kind of thing. You can try it and see if it works, and experiment with it and see what feels good to you, and then come back with it. So I think it's about, you know, like I said, like creating that open environment of like you trying it and understanding if it feels better, and then coming back to it, right? Of like, yeah, that did work, or that didn't work. So yeah, I think like you said, like, it's, for me, I think like I'm not saying I'm like the best like mentor or anything, or instructor by any means, or the best school, right? I'm sure there's like so many talented professionals out there who are very like well knowledgeable. But for me, I think what's exciting is like, every term I'm finding ways to make myself more available, and to word my notes better, and to make everything more clear. And I think that just helps me to become a better instructor, in a way of like, how can I make this easier to understand for someone, right? So yeah, I'm constantly thinking that, of like, every concept that I get, I try to think of it in my own ways of like, how would I explain this and how would I show this visually? Because when you have like this like set like, you know, animation Bible of like, this is how you teach a walk cycle, or this is how you approach a blank, whatever, you know, and a lot of it is true, but it's about how can I renew that and how can I do it in a way that I understand it and I think that will make a lot of sense to other people. So yeah, it's a constant growth for me, I think. And again, every term I learn and I'm continuing to grow. So yeah.
And so that goes into another question. What's the most common mistake you see in growing animators? Which I know you can go a lot into.
Yeah. I think, well, I would say for a lot of animators that I would say practice your fundamentals a lot more than you think. Like, if you can show me a really, really well done ball bounce or a walk cycle, that's all I need to know from you. If you were like applying to like a school or something, that's all I want to see. You don't have to show me this great acting shot, whatever. If you can show me like a really well, like if you can showcase good weight to a certain object, and I believe that there's weight to it, I already know that you've practiced enough where I can work with you from there. Because if it's, I see a lot of people, a lot of students who want to just jump into the deep end and they just do a full body mechanics or full lip sync, and it's all over the place, right? And then I always like give notes of like, let's bring it back down to the foundation thing, you know, ideas. And this phrase that goes all the time of like, everything's a bouncing ball is really true. Like if you can, for every student out there, like slow down, right? I know you think you have to get a job like by end of the year kind of thing. And I know it's easier said than done, especially if you're struggling with money, but you know, get a part-time gig at least to help pay for things, right? And I've already told you guys of like how many weird things I did for money just to survive. So I've been in your shoes. So I'm not just saying this like without knowing. I've done it. Like really slow down and take your time with especially the areas that you struggle with. And if you don't know what you struggle with, get some notes from other people, like get some notes from these guys from the channel box, like show them like your shot, and then they could probably tell you like the things that you're lacking. So slow down and like, so to answer the question of like common mistake that I do see is, like I said, students like jumping in just too far from the very beginning. And I just don't see a lot of like really well executed ball bounce to a walk cycle, like a really, like if you can, I just want to see you sell me weight. Because that goes so long ways of like, because again, that ball bounce will carry over to your hip, to your chest, to the head, even the mouth corners. And so I would say slow down. And I'm trying to think of like any other common mistake. Yeah, I mean, that would be like a biggest thing for me that stands out the most. And then again, we can go like further into like all the other common mistakes and stuff. But I would say that would be like my biggest tip of like just sell on the ball bounce and a walk cycle. Just give me those like foundational exercises and just execute that flawlessly. And I guarantee you, once you get that down, it'll be a lot easier for you to do a body mechanics versus if you've just glossed over it 100%.
Yeah, I think you should have a perfect ball bounce, at least one, before moving on to anything else. Because, you know, it's very easy to track. Because, like, I keep very on, like, students that start from the basics all the way on. And I like watching a lot of student work on the AM campus and wherever. It's like, you see students, they have struggles with ball bounces. They have struggles with overlap, and they have struggles with walk cycles, and they have struggle with body mechanics, and then acting. And the ones that have a good ball bounce, more than not, they have a good walk cycle, and it carries. And it was what I was talking to one person of, like, your animation journey is not a race, it's building a house. And if the foundation is cracked, everything you build on top of that is going to be unsteady and it's going to be shaky. If you make sure that foundation is solid and perfect, everything you build on top of that is going to be way more stable.
Right.
And it's almost a detriment moving on without it, because then you build bad habits.
Right.
To where I've seen students go 3 years animating, and they're animating all wrong because they never learned how to animate correctly. And now you have to basically go back from scratch and break those bad habits of, oh, this is how I animate a shot, and it's totally wrong. You have to break those habits now to do it correctly and then move on. And so it's very, very important, from what I've like just watching other students, that you have a good foundation.
Right. Yeah. And then that foundation carries over to like, now once you got that nailed down, now you have to put on your director hat, because I don't think students realize, like, when you're an animator, especially when you're starting as an animator, creating a reel, you have to be a director too. And I think a lot of times we forget that, and we just want to execute. A lot of times, and we forget that, especially if you want to get to feature studios, they want to see your ideas, and then those ideas come from being a director more than an animator, honestly. Of like we go back to this whole idea of asking the why, right? It's like, why is a character in this scene? So I see this a lot. Again, this is a common problem that I see a lot of character just doing something. They just do something, and at the end of it, I'm like, why, right? Like, why is this important? Like, why is the character here? Why did the character do such a thing? And if I'm asking those questions by end of your shot, that's like the whole idea of the foundation thing of like, you didn't ask those questions before you started. You just jumped onto executing it, and that's why it's missing all those layers of what makes up a good performance and what makes up a human being, right? So just make sure you spend a lot of time and slow down of creating your character, creating a believable story. Because again, human beings are made up of such complex emotions and motivation, and everything that we do has a purpose. Even from the slightest like squint or a blink, everything has some sort of reason behind it. So like, really take your time, especially if you're moving on from the ball bounce to the next. Then make sure you answer all those questions, and make sure everything is clear before you move on. And only way for you to know that is to make sure you show it to everyone. Like, try to get other eyes, because a lot of times you probably won't see it. In your mind, you probably think it works. It's clear to you because you know what's going on in your head, but visually it might not read to everyone. So take your time.
I remember 3 months, 4 months into AM, I was animating a body mechanics assignment, and I was like, you know what, animating is easy. Like, I just have to remember the 12 principles, and I'm good. I was like, all I have to do is just, what you're talking about, executing. And I was like, man, animation's easy. If I'm doing this in 3 months, like, give me 6 months, give me 8 months, and I'll be getting hired at Pixar. Because I didn't understand how much it wasn't just executing; it's how you execute and the ideas and all that, which I'm still struggling to get to this day. It's like, it was so small to me back then, and I didn't even realize there was this massive universe of possibility outside of just, oh, don't have knee pops, don't have spacing pops, don't have, bad balance, like the 12 principles. I didn't understand there was anything beyond that.
Right.
And I very quickly realized how wrong I was. Being like, oh, it's easy.
Yeah. And I've made the same mistakes too. So I definitely come from a humble experience of like having made all those mistakes. And I should have saved all my reels, but there were some really weird shots that I've done, and you're like, why? So,
yeah. And then another question is, let's see. Here's a good one. How was your first day at Pixar?
First day was again, everything's Zoom, right? Everything's remote, so it doesn't feel like I even switched jobs, honestly.
Yeah.
I would say the first week or two of just training in Presto is it's mind blowing in a good way, but also in a challenging way, because now I have to like rewire my brain to work slightly different. But yeah, it's overwhelming, I think. I think that goes for like any gigs that you start, but just learning a new software, because we're so used to doing Maya, right? So now everything's like stripped away from me, like all the tools that I remember through Animbot and stuff, and it's now to adapt to a new workflow. Um, so with that, like, yeah, it's been quite a challenge, and like kind of like what I was talking to you guys before this started, it was like I have to like rework everything, like this home setup that I made specifically. They made myself very like comfortable at Disney, right? Of like I got everything set up perfectly, right? It's like a well like geared machine, and then like Pixar comes in and presto, and everything's just like not working, and I'm just like everything's like on fire, and I'm like and I'm like switching out things. So like now I'm trying to find like a new like a good workflow and a work setup, because again I think it's so important that your work setup is like as comfortable as you can make it, and as inviting as you make it can make it. um so yeah, I basically try to make sure that everything feels right. I think that's like, for me at least, like very important. So
Yeah.
yeah.
When you got in your first day at Pixar, did they bring you into some secret Zoom meeting that had a video on how all the Pixar movies are connected and all these secrets to the movies that haven't been released yet?
Yeah, I had to do a ceremony of like wearing black robes and then
Yeah.
like putting a candle, make sure.
You stomp on the ball yourself.
Yeah. Exactly. And then we had to like print out a picture of a Pete Doctor, and then we had to like bow down to it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. And then another one was when you were talking about your animation story. How many
Mhm.
years between starting school to
Mhm.
getting to Disney? How many years?
How many years? I mean, the brick and mortar, I think I was there for like 5 years, right? Yeah, almost 5 years, because again, I switched midway from biology major uh, to all the way to animation, and then another year of staying home, and then working at home, animating like a bunch of like terrible reels that I ended up having to throw away, and then moving to California, about like a year, solid year of me working a full-time job at a law firm, and I think I did anim school on the side for like 2 classes. So that's about, counting the brick and mortar, and so that's about 7 years, I think, 7 years. But yeah, it's yeah, and it's funny, like brick and mortar schools, I think like took a lot of time from me. And I'm not saying brick and mortar is a terrible idea if you have the money. I think it's a great experience if you have the money.
Yep.
But if you're fighting with money, I would say online school is probably the best bet, because it just kind of like forces you into like a very specific skill set that you want to get into. Because brick and mortar kind of teaches you to be more of a generalist, because so you can like dive into every department of like rigging and modeling and whatnot, and kind of seeing what you like. But that's a lot of money to test what you like. Um, but I would say experience-wise, you get the experience of making friends and stuff. But
Yeah.
it did take a lot of years, as you can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with the explosion of like content on YouTube, you can get a better view of every pipeline through YouTube than you can at a university. I mean, like, I went to an online school just for animation, but all my friends that went to university, I know more about modeling, rigging, UVing, all these different stuff just because I've looked at YouTube videos than they remember from any of their classes because they
Right.
never used them and it wasn't very in depth. And so, like, you know, back then it was great to learn what you wanted to do, but now, like, I feel like you can get a better idea from that from YouTube than from
For sure.
university.
Yeah.
And it's free.
Yeah. So many online resources out there. And
Yeah.
like I said, there's so much easier to connect with professionals in the industry now.
Yeah.
Like literally you'll find like a modeler or rigger on Twitch or something just doing live, they're just doing stuff, and you can just watch them.
Yep.
And back then you probably had to pay for some kind of experience like that, right?
Yep.
But now it's just like literally everywhere at your fingertips if you just know where to look. And there's just so many resources out there where it literally tells you where to look.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's like right now it's like the golden times of like just content being available.
Yeah.
So yeah, just take the advantage. and yeah, and just
Yeah.
like just keep learning, because it's like an advice that I give to everyone in general is like, no matter where you're at in life, time keeps moving forward with you or without you, right?
Yep.
So sure, take a break from, you know, like animation stuff for your mental health. Obviously, that's very important. But just remember that no matter what you do, time's just it's gonna move forward.
Yep.
Time is a very heartless person. Um, they don't care about your feelings. They're just gonna keep moving.
Yep.
So it's whether you catch up to that or not, right? So I think it's about finding that healthy balance of like, you know, for you, and but also like just making sure that you're constantly looking for ways to grow.
Yep. And then another question is tips if you struggle with perfectionism, spending time on little things that don't matter.
Yeah. It's funny because in animation everything matters. Especially at Disney, like literally everything matters, like every little detail. But I would say perfectionism, I think it's a very common thing, especially as an artist, and it can be healthy, but a lot of times, depending on how you deal with it, can be unhealthy. I think if you beat yourself down a lot for not being perfect, I think that's when it can have a very detrimental like effect on your mental health, because you'll constantly not be happy with your work, right? Um, and I think there's like a fine balance of like being proud of your work in the sense of like all the effort you put into it, and it's accomplished and it came out nicely. You can be definitely proud of your work. You don't want it to get to a point where it feeds your ego of like, oh, I'm untouchable now. Look at this beautiful shot I did. You know, you don't want that kind of, you know, moment, but you want to be just proud of the work that you've done, right? But you don't want to be on the extreme side of like you could have had like a really good shot per se, but like just because you're such a perfectionist, you're like this is trash, right? And if someone gives you a compliment over it, no, this is trash, right? So you're kind of like devaluing what others think about your work, like their opinion of your work, by saying like, no, it's trash. Like I think we have to find a healthy balance of accepting what people say about our work, and also like just accepting of ourselves. Like we're not perfect. We're all trying to grow as an artist and as a person. Um, so again, this is obviously like easier said than done, and you probably should see a therapist in general for like a lot of the mental issues, and especially like being a perfectionist. I feel like that's very rooted deep probably into your history in the past. I'm sure same thing for me. But yeah, I think it's about kind of like accepting yourself that you're not perfect, and forgiving yourself that you're not perfect, and just going from there kind of,
Yep.
and kind of just understanding that everyone probably feels the same way too about their own work. So you're not alone, but definitely just be more forgiving to yourself, because when I was a student, I definitely was very, very unkind to myself of like, especially if I would get rejection letters, right? I would just be like, I'm like a worthless human being, right? Of like, I can't believe I couldn't get in for the second time or for the third time. I'm like, what the hell am I doing? You know?
Yeah.
But again, it's just because a studio doesn't accept you, or just because something has happened where you didn't get the role that you wanted, don't take it to heart, right? Like, sure, maybe your skill set isn't currently there yet for you to get into that studio, but it doesn't mean it's impossible, right? You can keep working at your craft, and try not to set your mindset towards like a certain artificial goal that doesn't necessarily relate to your skill set per se, right? So just continue to work towards your craft, and, you know, like continue to make mistakes, because making mistakes is like, it's a great thing, especially if you notice that it's a mistake. It's a bad thing if you don't know it's a mistake. So you probably would have never known you made a mistake. But if you know you're making mistakes, great. Keep making those mistakes. Not like, I'm saying, keep making those mistakes of like, learn from those each mistake, and then just make another mistake and learn from that mistake. You're basically like patching holes in a way of like, it's like, oh yeah, that doesn't belong there, and you like fix that, and then you make another hole and you fix that, and then that way you know how to like make a better shot in the end. You know what I mean? So just keep pushing for growth, and we're all not perfect as a human being. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. I think that's honestly all the questions we've got. Do you have anything you want to plug about Kyosil or anything?
I have a dumb question.
Oh,
Sure.
What's your favorite tattoo that you have right now?
Oh, I wish I had more. Because yeah, okay, these are all from my wife, but
we don't talk about the one under your sleeve, the right one.
You mean this one? My estranged lover. So that's Mickey.
Yeah.
And then I think my favorite is probably this guy. I don't even know the name of this guy. And there's like a little sword here. And then there's like this lady in the veil. But this one's a cute one right here. I don't know if you see it. It says smile with a Lego head. Yeah, I got that because I was like, don't take life too seriously.
Yeah.
Because like I feel like tattoo is a great representation of that. Because like you're like, oh, it has to mean something like, it has to mean like my ancestor has done this for my history. No. I'm like, you know what? Just don't take it so seriously. Just get a stupid Lego head that says smile.
I'm with you. I have at least 3 dumb tattoos, and I regret nothing.
Exactly. Like we're all gonna die at some point. So at least I can look tatted up when I die. You know what I mean? But yeah.
They're really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I want more. I want like my dog at some point. So yeah, I'm gonna be tatted up by end of this whole quarantine. Probably.
Yeah. Another. Oh, I forgot another question that somebody brought up was, you're a man of hidden talents. I don't think many people know that you can sing.
Oh, sing?
Yeah.
Who said that? Who knows how to sing?
Kenny.
I know how to sing?
Kenny found out that you know how to sing.
I don't know if I know how to sing.
He found an old video of yours from like 8 years ago where you were singing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is that out there? Oh, man.
Yeah.
Kenny, drop that video in the chat.
It's Kenny, as I can imagine. He just said, sing for us, Shawn.
No. Kenny, I'll talk to you later. It's funny, like I like in the early days in college and stuff, I dabbled in, I think that's when like YouTube was like in like its infancy phase of like everyone's kind of just making content on YouTube.
Yep.
And then doing covers I think was like a big thing at the time, like on YouTube. So my friend and I were like, we got really into it and I try to just do it. And again, I'm not not like a singer. So I was just doing it just because I thought it was a cool thing to do.
Yeah.
But I'm nowhere near talented. But I will say, with those YouTube videos, I think it was my year after I graduated from college and I was kind of at home. I don't know if you guys know, there was like a K-pop competition. It's called K-pop Star or something. I don't know. It was for like a 1 year, and then the writer reached out to me and saying like they saw my YouTube videos and wanted me to try out. And at that time I was trying to be an animator, so I'm like, nah, it's okay. But anyways, that was my.
So you almost became a K-pop star.
Yeah, almost failed to become a K-pop star.
Did you have any music training or anything like that?
Or? No. I just
none?
picked up a guitar because that's like the cool thing to do of like knowing guitar and playing music for at the time I was trying to like get girlfriends and stuff, and like I'm gonna sing to their hearts, but no, it's. I wish I did a proper learning though, because it's unfortunate.
Cool. So I think that's all the questions we got. So again, if you want to plug anything for Kyosil, talk anything about that before we wrap it up.
Yeah, Kyosil enrollment is technically open. I think we're closing in like a week, but we only have a few mentors available. If you're in the game animation, we have a new person named Marcus Hammerstadt. He's been in the industry for like 16 years, I believe, in the game industry, and he's just super well knowledge in the games. But what I like about Marcus, he's like super passionate. just like us, about wanting to mentor. So if you're interested in games, he's at Blizzard right now. So, and then Daniel Klug, he's a great animator. He was a supervising animator at Disney prior to moving over to Blizzard to work on Overwatch, because that was like his dream. So he like decided to move on over to Blizzard. So, and then Alex Snow, he's currently at Disney Animation. But yeah, if you guys are ever interested, even if it's not now, if you're interested in the future, like they're there, you know. And again, I'm not trying to like make this school like a business kind of thing. So it's always like kind of like what you get is what you see kind of thing. So if you like these mentors and you want to learn from them, go for it. You know what I mean? But you're not gonna break my heart if you can't. Like I'd rather have you just learn. If you can learn from like Animation Mentor or Anim Squad, whatever, do it. Go for it, right? As long as you're learning and growing, I'm happy for you, right? No matter where you get that knowledge, I couldn't be happier. Because again, I think you can get these golden nuggets of knowledge everywhere. It's just about where you look and which mentor you find or instructor you find. So, but if you're ever interested, you can always visit us on our website or Instagram. But yeah, this was really fun to kind of talk to you guys.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Always good conversation chatting with you. So
for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming and watching, and we'll see you guys next week.